Hello, BookTube. I put out a call for questions, and I got a lot of good ones, so we're going to dive right in and get to them. Starting with Hannah at Hannah's Books. A question from a friend asked recently, when people read without sub-vocalizing, do they perceive rhythm and cadence embedded in the writing? If so, how does that process happen? Uh, this is referring to those of you who might not know what Hannah's talking about. This is referring to a call that I often make on this channel for you to not sub-vocalize when you're reading. In other words, when you're reading text, you don't have to say it out loud in your head. You can just read with your eyes directly into your brain without routing it towards saying it out loud. It's a habit that most readers have, and it's a bit hard to get rid of, as all ingrained habits are, but it's worth it to do if you want to increase your reading speed. And the question here is, if you do that, if, in other words, you remove the vocal component completely, then what about the vocal elements of what you're reading? What about the rhythm and the cadence? And I've had this question before a few times, and I would say a couple of things. Number one, most of what you're going to be reading isn't going to have any rhythm or cadence. That is a very optimistic way of looking at the talent level of the average writer that you're reading. To quote a great man, 90% of science fiction is crap, but then again, 90% of everything is crap. But if you're reading something and you suspect it of having rhythm or cadence, then feel free to read it out loud. Sean says, what things do you notice in the bean's behavior as she matures? More importantly, how has she learned to adapt and how you speak or behave? For those of you who are wondering, that's my miniature schnauzer Frida is the bean. I've had her for a few years now, and the question number one, what things do you notice in Bean's behavior as she matures? Well, the natural progression is happening. When she was a puppy, she was spastically energetic about everything at all times, and over time, dogs learn they don't need to be that way, and time also passes faster for them than it does for humans. So Frida is noticeably older. She will still vault up to investigate any new thing, no matter, even from a sound sleep. And I know that she's just a couple of years away from not being willing to do that, from being willing to wake up and turn her attention towards something new, but not get up and analyze it. She still does that, though. She still vaults up out of the air. But she is learning a lot more. So she's much better able to put the world in perspective. I'm looking over at her because she's laying on the bed with her chin propped on the windowsill, just looking out at the world. And your other question was, how has she learned or adapted to how I speak or behave with her? Well, we were pretty well melded as a friendship a long time ago. As soon as she got out of puppyhood, as soon as she was an adult who was able to know what was going on around her, we were pretty well on the same page. We like each other quite a bit. The only difference that has manifested recently is that recently she has started to have some health problems, and they are the type that are not quiet and internal, where I only know she has them because a human professional has told me. They are external and noticeable, and they're only periodic. It's nothing to worry about, I don't think, but it can be frightening, and it frightened her. And when that happened, then I saw the penny drop. Usually with dogs of mine, I am the sunset. I am the sunrise. I am gravity. So for a long time, it's, well, of course I pay attention to everything you do. Of course I love you. Of course I hang around you and all that sort of stuff. I don't even think about it. And more importantly, I don't care about it any more than you care about gravity. And every day, with my dogs, typically, that changes once they start to worry, once they start to feel infirm. Usually it happens when they're getting much older. And then suddenly realize, he is the sunrise. He is the sunset. He has always been here. He has always been loving. He has always helped. I have always been able to shelter in him. And that's when they start to feel a little bit meta. They start to feel a little bit aware of that. And Frida has come to that a little early. A little bittersweet, but I'll take it, definitely. But one way or another, there are no gaps anymore. in how we communicate. In fact, fewer gaps with her than I've had with any dog in a long, long time. The idea that I might need to get angry with her, the idea that we would even disagree about something, is so alien now that I never crosses my mind anymore. Which hasn't been true even with dogs that I really love. There have been times where, you know, where we disagreed, or where they did something wrong, something that was going to be a danger to them if they didn't knock it off. And they didn't know that, and I did, and that's why I sort of make the rules. But with Frida, that it isn't even a question. It never has been, really. This is the only dog I have ever had who didn't wantonly chew on random objects when she was a puppy. She chewed on stuff that I wanted her to chew on. This is the only dog I've ever had who didn't really go exploring into places that she shouldn't go. Frida wouldn't, for instance, leave the apartment without my permission in a million years. She could have 100 people on the other side of the door frame urging her on, and she wouldn't do it. Not in a million years, and that's her decision. So we're in sync. We're pretty well in sync. Hannah's Books returns for another question. Since you mentioned how his Dickens biography in another video today, I would love to hear what you think of Peter Ackroyd's History of England series. I like it a lot. It has all the weaknesses of a multi-volume history of England. There have been many of them. They all have the same weakness, which is that you're pretty much trapped in a taxi cab with the author. It's not scrupulous history, in other words. It's more... and Ackroyd is being more conscientious about it than most authors do, but still, it's the author's guided tour. Even Dickens wrote a book along those lines, and doesn't remove its value at all for what it is. Let's see here. Chapter 21 says, "Why are you such a Chad?" Yes. Okay. Okay, that's going to be the question of this whole session. But for those of you who don't know what Chapter 21 is talking about, there's terminology in the incel community. Incel means involuntarily celibate. And they have a whole universe of terminology. And one of their terms is a Chad. And Chad is a stereotypically square-jawed, wavy-haired, presumably dumb, 8-pack abs, stereotypical guy. In the incel community, Chad is the enemy because Chad is getting the women that would otherwise go to you. Every aspect of their worldview is just so incredibly diseased, so incredibly misogynistic, so incredibly whiny. And they've given a name to their enemy. Chad is their enemy. And they would rather crap post on Reddit all day long from their keyboard about how Chad is their enemy than maybe go to the gym. You know, and 200 push-ups a day and 200 sit-ups a day is well within. You don't need to go to the gym to do that. You do 200 push-ups and 200 sit-ups a day, and at the end of a year, you're going to be Chad. No matter what you might think about how thin your wrist is, or about how non-prominent your chin is, they'd rather complain than do that. As to why I'm a Chad, I don't know. What's your secret to being a stone-cold super hottie? My first thought is your confidence. Well, okay, you're joking, and I really appreciate it. Why are you such a Chad? But I have been told many, many times in my life by Chads. I have been told many, many times, there's a thing about you. Yes, you're old, and yes, you're ugly, and yes, you're a little or even a lot weird. But I like hanging out with you because you don't doubt yourself. And so many people that I've had Chads tell me, so many people I know, my age, older, my parents, my grandparents, so many of them have a vein of self-doubt running right through them, and you don't have that. Not the same thing as being, blindly egotistical or arrogant, but no, I don't. I have self-confidence. So I know there are things that I can do really well, and I trust myself in pretty much any situation, and that matters. that matters. Certainly, Certainly in my, not to take your question too far afield, but certainly in my life, um, every woman with whom I have ever been romantically involved, universally, every single one of them, whether they were a track star who could have had their pick of any man in the dormitory, all the way on, every single one has said, yeah, you're nothing to write home about. You have nice eyes. But the thing that gets me is, A, you make me laugh my ass off, and two, you're not weak. In other words, you have self-confidence. That's another thing that I want to tell those incel crap posters on Reddit is, you might want to get your house in order. If that's your main goal, you might want to get your house in order. But anyway, it's all downhill from why are you such a Chad. But let's see. Link Joker says, since 2021 is the year of me trying to break my fear of big books. Oh, good, you should. I'd like to know your opinion of some that maybe don't quite have the backing of being literary classics to assure my reading time is well spent. And number one, thoughts on Shogun, James Clavell's Shogun. It's excellent. It's just excellent. Dive right in. It's not intimidating at all. Thoughts. Number two, thoughts on Will Durant, on the Durant's History of Civilization series. It is also excellent. It is fantastic reading. You wouldn't think so, or you'd think you'd get tired, or it might seem the ultimate in intimidation because it's so enormously long, 18,000-page books. But it is enrapturingly good. You would see a whole shelf behind me of the Will and Allie Earl Durant books if a couple of you hadn't been kind enough to send me e-copies, which are infinitely easier to search, infinitely easier to read. So I have those instead. But I'm not sure if at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, if I came across a nice dust-jacketed set of all of those books, I might get them anyway. I don't know. But and also thoughts on Eiji Yoshikawa's Taiko. It's very good. Of the three you're naming here, it's the one I would put the least. If you have a time period, naturally, I'm going to champion nonfiction here. If you have a time period that you're really interested in, or even a figure in history that you're really interested in, the key, as I've said many times, start small. So if there's a figure, let's say you're interested in Voltaire. Well, there's a whole volume called The Age of Voltaire in Ariel and Will Durant's series. Pick that book and just read that. You pick a thing and then expand outward from there. And as your confidence grows in what you know and how well you know it. The Durants are fantastic company on the page. So of these three, for your time well spent, I would say pick one of them. You don't at all need to read their volumes in order. Pick one of their volumes that seems to you the closest to a time period or characters or whatever that are most interesting to you. Start there. Marcus says, I just finished Surrounded by Enemies by Bryce Zabel, an alternate history where JFK survives his assassination. And one thing Zabel imagines is that Kennedy gets impeached. It's not really a spoiler since it's a chapter title. I'll spare the why, though, because that would be a spoiler. I hope you're not implying that you'd be spoiling it for me. I assume what you mean is that you're worrying about spoiling the book for everybody else. You're not, I assume here, assuming that I have not read this book. I would hope that anyway. What do you think would happen with Kennedy had he lived? He certainly wouldn't have been impeached. Certainly the events would not have unfolded anywhere like what's in Zabel's book. Not anywhere like. Had he lived, quite a few things I think would have happened. He would have been honored. I think he would have got a huge amount done. And the course of history would have been changed because I believe he would have de-escalated Vietnam and ended it. Would have preferred, sending John Kenneth Galbraith or whoever to get some sort of understanding rather than just chucking warm bodies at the problem. I believe that would have happened. So, I mean, it's an interesting book. It's a very interesting book, but I would have extrapolated things a lot less melodramatic and a lot more normal. Kennedy didn't want to be melodramatic at all. I think that, and it was before the age of social media, so I think he would have gone on to become a very honored two-term president. Culture Fan says, can you recommend a nonfiction book on frontier life or cowboy, i.e. their lifestyle back then, daily life, etc.? There's a series of books. You may have seen it years ago. Mark Richardson at Richardson Reach did a library tour of his enormous home library, and he has there's a long string of, I think, Time Life did a whole series on the Old West, and those are really, some of those volumes are really good on the daily life of the cowboy. Do you have a favorite Tarzan novel? Yes, I do. Believe it or not, it's The Son of Tarzan. That's my favorite one of them all. And what's your opinion of Julian Assange? It's not very favorable, I can tell you that. He's a horrible bad actor, a papier-mâché megalomaniac, and a traitor. The idea that he could be some sort of cultural icon for freedom of expression, I see that. I see people pushing that idea, and I think of a line from my beloved The Lion in Winter. If you're a prince, there's hope for every ape in Africa. So, Isaiah Armstrong says, in a past Q&A, you mentioned how you used to teach Hemingway and deconstruct him line by line. Yes, indeed. The pseudo-intellectuals in the back of the room used to howl in outrage. They used to howl. And at the beginning, they howled. Then they started to realize how much fun it is to do, not just with Hemingway, but with anybody. And then they started to like it. And they also loved the fact that they knew they could argue with me. I'm a teacher in the front of the classroom, but they knew they could argue with me. The only thing I required is that you have to bring cutlery to the table. You can't just argue because I'm hurting your feelings. You have to bring cutlery to the table, which forced them to learn the tools of analyzing prose critically. That's the only way they could defend themselves against what I was to defend their beloved icon, is to come and say, well, here's why I think this is good. It's delightful. Those classes were a lot of fun. Let's see here. Would you ever be willing to do a Hemingway read-along where you deconstruct a chapter a week? Well, considering how many howls of protest I got from my beloved Dude Bro co-booktubers when I deconstructed The Road by Cormac McCarthy, I'm still getting emails about those 4 videos. Considering that, I don't know that BookTube could withstand the trauma. A similar question. What do you think of the Iceberg Theory? The idea is that there is a lot more going on underneath the surface that has been attributed to Hemingway's novels. I think I've got this question before. I don't see it. I've heard the theory, and I've heard it applied especially to Hemingway, and I don't see it. And when I say I don't see it, I don't mean because the subtleties of Hemingway's artistry is eluding me. I don't see it because I don't think it's there. It's my job to see it if it's there. I wouldn't miss an iceberg. But I've gone back to this stuff over and over and over again, and I don't see it. I think the theory was invented to excuse the person rather than the person embodying the theory. Jose Mercado says, hello, Steve. As everyone has a top 10 books list to read, how about a top 10 not to read of all time? Well, you could look at my worst books. I have worst books going back for 30 years now online. But I don't know that even those worst books, I don't know that I would say not to read. You never know what kind of a silk purse somebody might make out of the particular sow's ear that they're getting. So I've never made such a list, though. Jenny Park says, which animal has been the most incredible to see in the wild whilst traveling, and where did you see them? A few times. The most incredible animal for me is an adult blue whale. I've seen that a few times, and it's always just astonishing, just absolutely astonishing. The plume, the exhalation is telltale, like all whale exhalations are. You can tell if you're out on the water for a while, you can tell what kind of whale by the shape and nature of the plume. But even so, that didn't prepare me for the sheer size, the largest living animal that has ever existed on Earth, and it's in our day. And there are some area, at least a long time ago, there were some areas of the ocean along their migration routes where you could find a full-grown adult blue whale. I saw that a couple of times, and always my first reaction was the same. All right, well, there's a spray, and then a few minutes later, there's a tail going down, and those have to be 2 different animals because they're incredibly far away from each other. It's the same one. It's the same one. The animal that dwarfs the size of the vessel that I'm on. Let's see here. Bob Van Beek says, when you were traveling, was part of the goal to go everywhere? And the same with the Western canon. Did you aim to read every book it includes? No, it just happens that way. In both cases, it just became very addictive. Royal Tube says, hey, Steve, your thoughts on combat sports such as boxing and MMA? I've never enjoyed them, especially MMA. I did a deep dive into MMA because I wrote a review of a book by an MMA pretty boy. I'll have to remember to leave a link to that review if I can find it. But MMA especially strikes me as something that I wouldn't have believed possible, which is boxing without the artistry. If you'd asked me for 50 years, I would have said boxing has no artistry, but MMA is just, uh, it's just trailer trash people in a cage, just tearing apart each other with basically no rules. And so I don't see the visual appeal even. At least boxing has a kind of visual appeal to it until you get close to it. The dude bros I know, the cigar chomping health dude bros online who all used to go to live boxing matches, just for the whole social afflatus of it. I want a little blood spattered on me. I want to go to ringside seats, dressed in a sort of archaic fashion with a beautiful blonde on my arm. I want the smoking. I want the drinking. I want all that. I never understood the appeal of that, but MMA doesn't even have that. And your follow-up question? Oh yeah, are you yourself a fighter? No, I much prefer to talk. Obviously, as you can tell from the fact that I talk endlessly on this channel, I have been in more unarmed combat probably than most people that you would know. I've lost count of how many times that's happened in my life, in my youth. Not my, I'm 800 million years old right now, but when you're traveling, there are going to be times when you're the only white person in the room, and that can be all that it takes. That can be all that it takes for someone to just insult you, and then you have a choice of letting them kick you out of the room while everyone laughs, and also I have always had a lamentable inclination for sticking up for people and things. And if you're willing to do that, if you're going to do that, you're going to fight. It's just gonna happen. If you see someone picking on someone or kicking a dog or something like that, and you say, not just, hey, I don't like that, but hey, you are going to stop that. I am imposing my will on you, and I'm bringing this right down to the law of the jungle. You're doing something I don't like. There's no one around, and if you don't stop doing it, I will physically stop you from doing it. That can get you in fights. I had a tendency to do that, so it happened quite a bit. I had a couple of advantages in such encounters. I don't have any sense of touch, so that's a big deal. That seems small, but that's actually a big deal, because a lot of people shy away. The fire break that stops them from committing all the way to saying, hey, knock off, don't hit that kid again or I'll punch you, is that they're afraid of being physically hurt. And I don't have that fear. I also know what I'm doing, and I know how to take apart a human body pretty quickly. It's a bad idea, even now in my dotage. It's a bad idea to fight me. In addition to which, if we're outside in most parts of the world, I have 100 allies within easy calling distance. And if you make me mad enough, well, then I will do that. I'm almost certainly in your own group, there's some dog that you think listens to you. They don't. They listen to me. So I managed to come out of it all right, but still, I encountered it quite a bit. Fortunately, I'm nice and peaceful these days. We won't talk about wage garnering. Let's see here. Ducky Little Dictum says, I rewatched the film version of Lion in Winter over the holidays. Such a treat. Oh my, yes. My favorite movie. What a treat. Yes, indeed. Oh. Oh my. Suppose I hold you back for a year. I can. It's possible. Suppose your first son dies. Ours did. It's possible. Suppose your daughter next. We were. That too is possible. How old is Daddy then? What kind of limp-eyed, gammy-handed, wizened line of things will you beget? And when you die, which is regrettable but necessary, what will happen to frail Alice and her pruny prince? You can't think Richard's going to wait for your grotesque to grow. You wouldn't let him do a thing like that. Let him? I'd push him through the nursery door. You're not that cruel. Sorry, I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but it's still cruel. For these 10 years, you've lived with everything I've lost and loved another woman through it all, and I am cruel? I could peel you like a pear, and God himself would call it justice. Anyway, you got a question, I think, somewhere along. And wonder if you saw the original Broadway production or any stage version. I didn't see the original Broadway production. A number of wags, including one I knew very well, used to say that if everybody who claims to have seen The Lion in Winter on its original, rather humdrum Broadway run had actually seen it, there would have been lines around the block. I didn't, but mainly because I was never all that big a Robert Preston fan. I think he's a bit of a ham. So I wasn't interested in seeing him as Henry II. And I don't believe I've ever seen a stage version after that, because the movie came along and spoiled me for all other versions, including the Patrick Stewart Glenn Close version, the less said of which the better. And can you recommend a favorite biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine? Marion Mead's. The one you're going to see is what's her name, Kelly, Eleanor of Aquitaine and the Four Kings, and it's not very good. That one is everywhere. Was for a time everywhere. It'll be the first book that comes up in any search, for Eleanor of Aquitaine / biography. But Marion Mead is better, so I'd pick her. Clash 2 says, "Hey Steve, what do you make of the first lesson taught in creative writing classes? Show, don't tell." Well, I did a video on writing tips a long time ago. I remember, if I remember, I'll leave a link to it. But in that video, I say what I maintain, which is that this is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and that it would rule out whole libraries full of authors who tell, in addition to showing or in place of showing, all the time, and do it so well that the idea of banishing them from the canon because they're not following some stupid little rule is absurd. No, the key is to show well. If you're gonna show, don't tell, fine. If you're gonna tell instead of showing, you have to tell well. You have to do a good job of it. If your reader is effortlessly, mindlessly reading along, eagerly turning the pages, then you're doing it right, regardless of how you do it. The rule is ridiculous. We love you. Oh, thank you. Feelings mutual. Leo Percara says, because of Arguably by C.H. Behind You. That's Arguably by Christopher Hitchens. Can you recommend some essays or essay books that you like? Well, anything on this shelf here. These aren't essays. I should keep in mind, most of these things aren't essays. They're just collected book reviews, prefaces, profiles, things like that. Essays are different. They are Henry David Thoreau. They're not. But these things are often called essays. And nowadays, if you write 2 paragraphs together of prose, your publisher will call it collected essays. Absolutely ridiculous. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that David Sedaris has never written an essay in his life. Okay, a stand-up comedy routine that you put into prose is not an essay. And that applies to him. That applies to, I'm single and I'm female. And I eat a tub of ice cream every night. How isn't this just the pits? If you do 5 different stand-up skits like that, and then you make a 120-page book, and your publisher calls it essays, they can call it whatever they want, but that they aren't them. But I would still recommend. We've got Evelyn Waugh, we've got Robert Hughes, the great Elizabeth Hardwick, J.M. Coetzee, Mary McCarthy. I'd recommend any of those people. Let's see here. Vera Pavlova says, I have a couple of questions this time around. Number 1, you often mention that you prefer some authors' nonfiction to their fiction. Are there cases where the opposite is true? Well, oddly, yeah, there is. Flannery O'Connor, for instance, prefer the fiction, absolutely. Tend to be true with Marilyn Robinson as well. I'm sure I could come up with other people. Number 2, what are some of the best hard science fiction novels or short stories you've read, and some of the best space operas? Well, it's always hard for me to tell. I think real hard science fiction would go right over my head because I don't know enough science. But somebody like David Brin would count, right? Larry Niven would count. David Brin's novel Startide Rising I have often praised on this channel. Werner Vinge, his novel Fire Upon the Deep, has to be, at least on some level, hard science fiction. I love both of those. And space opera, well, the one that's on my mind recently is The Expanse. James Cormie's The Expanse. That is just terrific. That is just terrific. Quintessential space opera. So enjoyable. Let's see here. How are we doing for time? Oh my. Oh, we're at 30 minutes. Okay, let's do a couple more and then stop. Morgana Dulac says, I hope I'm not too late. Here goes my questions. On a past Q&A, you said that Brandon Sanderson's books were pulp fiction. Can you expand on it? Why pulp and not high fantasy like some people categorize it? Well, the question implies that high fantasy can't be pulp. To me, I was characterizing it that way because it's written at white heat and it's not revised. So you know, Brandon Sanderson would have thrived in the pulp era specifically because he can generate really engaging prose at white heat in ream amounts, just mountains of prose in the same amount of time that it would take a chin-stroking Yaddo graduate to write one paragraph. And no matter how good you are at doing that, and he is great at doing that, there are endemic problems, and one of which, of course, is consideredness. The kind of origami folding on itself that considered prose has, that white heat pulp prose cannot have. It cannot, by definition, have it. So that'll be missing in Brandon Sanderson. That's all. I didn't really mean it as a criticism. Ryan Thomas says, OMG, I have so many questions. I'll send you a transcript via email. Yes. Well, okay, I'm assuming that's a joke, and that is a perfect illustration of what not to do. That one of the many things not to do on these Q&As. Don't send me questions to my email and expect me to remember to port them back over here. Leave them on this and just be brief. Scott Danielson says, can you think of any worthwhile books, fiction or nonfiction, that accurately portray what daily life is like as a U.S. senator or representative? Fewer than you would think. There was a big nonfiction book that I've been racking my brains for at least a year trying to think up the title of this thing. It's not The Power and the Glory. It's something like The Glory and the Dream, or The Power and the Dream, or something like that. If it weren't such a dumb title, it would be easy for me to remember it. It's a big, thick thing on the participatory politics in the old version of the United States. And I loved it. I would love to have a copy, but until I know the name, I don't know the author. It's terrible. But in terms of fiction, there's, of course, the quintessential answer here would be Advising Consent by Alan Drury. It's not just senators and representatives. It's the inner workings of Washington just in general. It's a half century old, but still makes really good reading. I think we should stop there. So let's stop there and come right back.